So you said something very important there. There's two terms. This is what I'm particularly fascinated with. First, let's talk about the difference between deferral and forgiveness
Sure.
of rent. And what are the my understanding of it was that it is actually deferral. It's like, we won't charge late fees.
Yep.
We just, you'll owe us later, or payment programs, whatever. Tell me a little about what you're seeing out there.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important distinction, right? I mean, for the most part, this is not rent forgiveness. It is deferral forbearance is the official word, and that means, right, that it's eventually going to become due, and it's just a matter of pushing out those payments. So it's great to do that now, but I think both landlords and tenants have to be wary. In 2 months, 3 months, whenever things get going again, it may come to pass that there's whether it's May, June rent due, and then a portion also of what's been deferred. A lot of banks and landlords, you're seeing probably 90-day deferral, but then maybe that's, paid out again over the next 12 months thereafter, let's say. So it is not, at least so far, there's no rent forgiveness. This will become due, on the back end in one shape or another.
Okay, and so what's happening now is that folk are negotiating these terms, are they, Peter?
Yeah, and that's right. And banks, have their own terms that they're negotiating. Obviously the agencies, Fannie and Freddie, are giving, as I said, 90-day deferrals for their clients, but that's only if on the back end, those landlords are deferring any evictions for that same time period. And there's, again, it's very fluid. There's federal regulations, there's state regulations, there's county regulations, and there's also, bank by bank regulations. So all of these things are being looked at, and, clients are looking at the regulations, but also pulling out their loan documents, their leases, and everybody's calling, whether it's tenants vis-a-vis landlords or borrowers vis-a-vis their lenders, and we're deluged all day long with clients wanting to know one way or the other, what to do.
Is anyone adding it to the principal balance? Is that anything that you've seen?
I haven't seen so far it has been added to the principal balance. I've just seen, for the most part, it's been deferred and on the back end. I do think, though, after April 1st comes around and people start seeing the real effect. So far, it's been theoretical. They think they know what's coming. But it is going to be interesting, especially if it goes on longer than people have thought, to see the practicalities when these start to come into effect of, how are they going to be handled? And I do think, right, I mean, so far it seems like people want to work together. I think, there's a human element, right, to this. It's not just a recession. People are, there's physical ailments and sickness. But we'll see, once this starts to come into play, and people start feeling the pain, so to speak, right? It's, what is actually going to come into play and happen.
And how are tenants, or how are landlords determining whether or not it's a legitimate call, for example? I don't mean that to suggest anybody's gaming the system, but how is that being played out? Yeah.
Right, and unfortunately, I think, right, that there will be at least a small portion of people who try to take advantage of the situation. But there, various landlords are putting in various procedures and policies, and proof of where employment, proof of, I don't know if any landlords yet are asking for personal financial statements, but they are asking for information on proving that you have filed for unemployment, prove that you are work at X restaurant and you can no longer go to work. They are asking for information because, look, if you're like me, you have a job where you can work remotely, you shouldn't be taking advantage of this and not paying. On the commercial side, it's a little easier, I think, to tell, because if you're a restaurant and you're mandated to close, you don't need much more proof, right? I mean, sure, you can maybe do some takeout or, what have you. But, and we can talk about this later, but retail, right, and hospitality, those commercial wise are, the hardest hit. And I think that's where, the biggest issues are going to be.
Interesting. And then, good. So I actually asked the question with office in mind, but you pivoted to multifamily, which is of course something I'm very interested in as well. So what difference are you seeing? Or how are different sponsors in different industries handling it, right? You've got the residential, commercial, real estate, residential operators, and then you've got the office primarily, these two major, and then obviously retail and industrial, but those two major ones. So what are there different processes going into place? How are they handling it differently?
Yeah, I think the asset class, really comes into play. If you're a multifamily operator, yes, you are going to have tenant defaults. I think I've heard, numbers. It depends on the area, of course, but people are expecting 25 to 30%, let's say, and that's probably, C class type, working class type apartments. But if you are a landlord of a retailer, or a Subway, let's say, you're going from full rent to zero or close to zero. So, we represent landlords and tenants. We've been proactive. The tenants have been sending letters even before everything was shut down, saying, we're just letting you know if we are forced to close, we're probably going to say this is a force majeure event under the lease. Landlords, we have some tenants with the Irvine Company. They proactively have told their larger tenants that they're going to work with them. Similar to, what I've been talking about on the multifamily side, they're, deferring rents for 3 months and then paying it back over the next 12-month or 18-month period. And they're obviously one of the larger ones, and they can, afford and they're better able to work with tenants. But I definitely think it depends on the asset class for sure.
So in multifamily, how does that work? A company can agree to spread out rents over 18 months. If you've got a tenant that is on a month to month, for example, or coming to the end of their first 1-year lease, you can't really negotiate those kinds of terms. So what are you seeing on multifamily?
Yeah, and multifamily, I think residential wise, right, they're being affected more so by the federal mandates, the state mandates, temporary halts and moratoriums on evictions. And the landlords are trying to work with them, but they're in a bind as well, right? Because they have, obligations to the banks and debt service and, coverage ratios. But it does seem like, at least vis-a-vis landlords and tenants, people are, again, with the human nature aspect of it, trying to work together. Not always the case with, buyers and sellers of properties and banks. But I think that everybody understands that, the tenants are going to be, especially again in the working class, they're restaurant workers or what have you, and they're really going to be feeling the pain. And landlords, I think, are, for the most part, amenable to working with those folks.